This video is about BSHF 101 Block 1 Unit 4 Post-Industrial Society. Introduction. In the previous unit, we read about the rise of industrial society. We also saw how with the coming of capitalism, there arose a polarization between capitalists and workers which became the hallmark of that society. The industrial society in the era of classical capitalism was marked by invention and utilization of machines and factories, with labor becoming a function of the industrial processes which came into existence. The inventions powered by steam and electricity transformed both the method and scale of manufacturing. In recent years, a phenomenon which hitherto has not been given the due attention has been taking place in the capitalist societies of the West. There has been definite changes in technology and in the society which has been brought forth by the advent of information technologies. Some writers see this a different phase in the history of capitalism. What happened? Since the 1960s and 70s, the US economy was threatened by the economic recovery of Europe and Japan. It also facing the challenge of third world nationalism and an unprecedented rise of oil prices. The war in Vietnam had further weakened the US and its economy was losing its competitive advantage. This was the time the US government and corporations had to take notice and adopt new strategies to counter the decline. A number of factors were happening in the ground level which had to be taken cognizance of. Firstly, the manufacturers adopted an international strategy of moving some elements of production overseas, taking the advantage of cheaper labor. Anti-union policies and establishing export processing or free trade zone. This strategy was particularly dramatic in the case of electronics and textile industries, where a phenomenal growth was seen in the previous years. Secondly, there had been a rapid growth in the service sector of the economy. This sector comprises transportation, public utilities, wholesale and retail trade, finance, insurance, real estate, government, business and personal services. From 1970 to 2000, service sector jobs more than doubled from 49 to 102 millions. In contrast, employment in the goods producing industry increased only by 15%. A measure of the decisive shift in investment flows from ground production to finance, insurance and real estate. We can examine the increase over time in investment in private fixed assets by industry sector. From the end of World War II, though the 1970s good production, mining, construction and manufacturing accounted for about 32% of the total increase in such investment, whereas in the 1980s and 1990s, the share was only 18%. In contrast, in the finance, insurance and real estate sectors, investment flows went down from 16% in the first period to 30%. Went from 16% in the first period to 30% in the second period, 1980s and 1990s. What did this mean? These changes has been traced by different writers over a period of time. Daniel Bell, an eminent sociologist who had been analyzing these trends, sees this as a shift to post-industrial society. He sees the coming of new information technology as a decisive feature of this shift. Bell points out that the Industrial Revolution was marked by an innovation of energy. This was a time when steam and electricity transformed the method and scale of manufacturing. He argues that now the post-industrial society moves at a very different quantum level, where energy is transformed into information and knowledge. Further, and yet in a broad sense, seeing the way in which information serves as a resource, as a control device, as we organize large masses of material and production, we begin to get a sense of how a new kind of change is taking place. He considers the relocation of industries as a breakup of the older systems as a result of the speed through which communication develops. This led to the spreading out of industries, what he calls a wider integration. He also sees a political fragmentation since the instruments of management are not responsive and perhaps cannot be responsive to these areas of change. Thus, according to Bell, the industrial society was characterized by manufacturing and therefore making of goods. A post industrial society, he says, in contrast, is one primarily involved in the processing of information and controlling the directions of communication. Neither of these replaces the other. This is to say, alongside the machine industry of the industrial society, there is a rise and development of an intellectual technology. This does affect the way in which manufacture is organized. The post-industrial society then is basically that in which high technology operates, and that this society utilizes the materials we derive from the information. In the post-industrial society, then we experience a change in the nature of technology. It is basically a change from mechanical technology to an intellectual technology. This intellectual technology is embodied in the elements of coded programming, software and various other devices, which become the way in which we organize our materials. This intellectual technology then requires a very different kind of education than it was during the age of mechanical technology. At the same time, various authors have pointed out there is a revolution in material science, which in areas of production and trade affects the way in which things happen. No longer will engineers think of separate metals as zinc, tin or copper. They will say rather, what sort of properties do you want? Do you want conductivity or ductility? What is it in a sense you want a thing to do? As Bell points out, they will make out from the combination of materials a reconstituent element, just as today we may think of a recombinant DNA in the way biological processes are organized. The process then, Bell points out, is not simply just telecommunications and computers. There is a matrix underneath which allows us to see how these things begin to take place, and more often chart diffusion of things. That is, if you want to think about post-industrial society, it is not when you have innovation or invention that is crucial, but it is when you have diffusion. It is the point where you have the way in which elements of change take hold and begin to spread throughout the society. The crucial point today says Bell, is the beginning of these processes of diffusion, not necessarily that of invention or innovation. Says Bell, following things occur in the arc of technology in the post-industrial society. Number 1. All systems hitherto mechanical becomes electromechanical and then electronic. For example, the typewriter becoming electronic. The idea of miniaturization comes into play. You can take things and shrink them to a smaller size. We can, for example, devise a chip and send to Mars. This can biologically and chemically analyze material from the surface of Mars and electronically send back a signal on its findings. Thirdly, you have digitalization. That is where you make analog systems binary and therefore compatible in a variety of ways with other kinds of communication. For example, a movie, a telephone call, letter or magazine article may be sent digitally via phone line, coaxial cable, tape or a disk. With the digitalization of the content becomes totally plastic. Any message, sound or image may be edited from anything to anything else. What is the result of this? Bell gives the example of how in the industrial society, great industrial complexes came into existence with traditional means of transport and communication. Waterways, for example, facilitated iron and steel industries to come up in a concentrated form. Example in Detroit. With communication technologies and transport, developing industrial units can be located in a dispersed fashion. Production of textile goods, for example, can mean having production and design units in location in different parts of the world. You can send design online to a production firm located in South Asia from the US. This design's individual requirements can be speedily catered to. Today, many production and design units of textile industries in the US are located in different countries of South Asia. There is a new approach to production using information technology. As a result, there is a flattening out of the traditional management structure. Hierarchical decision making of the industrial factory production is now replaced by multi-skilled teams with groups of workers collaborating at every stage, from design to quality control, with each team member contributing to a process of continual improvement while simultaneously being allowed access to all computerized information gathered within the company. Thus, says Bell, what is happening today is the breakup of these systems. We have a situation where the old industrial structure of the world, the old concentration of industries began to lose their significance. Now it is the communications which becomes the major determining infrastructure through the organization of economic changes, trade, communications as such. Changes in society. The concept of post-industrial society emphasizes the centrality of theoretical knowledge as the axis around which new technology, economic growth, and the stratification of the society is organized. Post-industrialism is then an effort to identify a change in the social structure. In the stratification system of the industrial society, the history base of power was property and the means of access through inheritance. In the post-industrial society, while property remains an important base, technical skill becomes another, sometimes a rival base, along with education as a means of access to the attainment of technical skill. The post-industrial society sees the continuation of the trends of the industrial society in a historical sense. Both Saint-Simon and Marx had emphasized the crucial role of engineers and science in transforming the society. In the post-industrial society, the chief problem is the organization of science and the primary institution, the universe or the research institutes. In the 19th and early 20th century, the strength of the nations was their industrial capacity. The chief index, which was steel production after World War II, according to Bell, the scientific capacity has become a determinant of its potential and power, and research and development has replaced steel as a measure of its strength. At the same time, we see a drastic decline in the number of industrial proletariat in the industrial society. Labor displaced from its traditional moorings in the countryside formed a huge proportion of the factory town population. In the post-industrial society, the industrial proletariat comprises a mere 15% of the working population and is steadily declining. In the same way, people engaged in agriculture make up 5% or less of today's advanced societies. The shift to services is also decisive. These human services or professional services in health, education, and social services expand the range of what a population can do. In the process, there is an expansion of longevity of the population and expanding of these skills. The central occupational category then emerges as the professional and technical. Growth in this category has outpaced all other major occupational groups. Bell points out that from less than a million in 1890, the number of professional and technical personnel has grown at 10.3 million in 1968. Within this category, the largest group was teachers, health workers, scientists and engineers, and engineering and science technicians. The growth of these sections is accompanied by a growth in the white collar workers. From 17.6% of the workforce in 1900, their percentage has risen to 46.7% in 1968. In the process, even the most widely discriminated group, the blacks in the US society, have made an impact on the growing professional sector of the US. About 20% of the black males are professional, technical and clerical occupation holders. However, this is still in stark contrast to 43% of white males in similar occupational categories in 1968. Another shift had taken place in the society with the shift to service sector. This was the large scale entry of women into the professional and service sector. In 1968, 46% of service sector employees were women, and by 2000 they had risen to becoming about 60%. The shift was important enough to be characterized by one author as a second bourgeois revolution. Though the service condition of women professional workers had not broken the patriarchal barrier, their presence in workforce in such large numbers meant redefining the issues which affect day-to-day life. Hence, for working women, the issue of balancing the working career and family life becomes important. What this grew the importance of child care and day care for working mothers. Appropriate neighborhood schools and community support becomes very important. Similarly, the questions of maternity benefits, maternity care becomes center stage. These also gave a flip to the dominant healthcare issues. Differing viewpoint. Here it might be useful to compare the views of J.K. Galbraith on this emerging society. Characterizing this as the new industrial state, he focused on how new technology has integrated with multinational corporation and state. Here he points out we have become servants thought and action of machines. Here he agrees with Daniel Bell that technology has developed an initiative of its own. Subsequent development is that as the integration of technology with the military industrial complex takes place, the economic function of the state becomes more varied. Next, he sees a transition from capitalism to the industrialism with the emergence of mature corporation which eliminate competitive forces of market relations and ensures planned economic behavior. Finally, he says this industry society makes possible the merger of these mature big corporations with the state. It is clear here that Galbraith is speaking of developments in 1960s and 1970s, whereas Bell is more sensitive to what has happened in the 1980s and 1990s. Bell has drawn attention to the process of political fragmentation as more and more big corporation activities get located overseas. In the 1990s, the Cold War is over, and therefore the earlier compulsions of the military industrial state of 1970s and 1980s are no longer there, and the society as such takes a new direction. This is a society full of optimism about how to harness technology to further needs of the day-to-day life. There is also a movement here towards freeing human life from technocratic compulsions. However, we need to be aware that the technocratic legacy is by no means over. As Marcuse has pointed out, this is a behaviorist universe where technology linked through patterns are still the order of the day. Bell is pointing to the promises this society holds for us, but equally important to remember here is that the good life comes at a price. The heaviest price is the way our thought belief system are ratified. That is to say, how they are delinked from nature and presented to us as some kind of a logical mathematical symbols. Summary. In this unit, we showed how the post-industrial society emerges as a distinct phase in the modern world. It is not that the industrial society has disappeared. Production and manufacturing continue to be important constituents of this new society. The change, however, is in the fact that a service sector shift is evident in the economy. This is signified by the rise of real estate, insurance and finance in a big way. Secondly, there is a decrease in the number of traditional proletariat engaged in manufacturing and production. There is also decline in the agriculture workforce. All these have shifted to the service sector. The rise of new technology in information and communication drastically changes the way work is performed now. All these entail changes in society and the issues with which it is confronted.